Nice to see you again. Thank you for joining the Economist stage once again.
Great to join you again.
Yes, and so this is a theme that I know that you've spent some time on. Your team has pursued over the course of years, but you have some fresh analysis on the cost of inaction. So why don't you update us on what you're finding, what your research findings are, and then we can talk about what this means for companies in particular, perhaps about thinking about the costs of to themselves of inaction and perhaps why they should be motivated to act.
All right. So we are releasing some research that we have done with Cambridge University, the Climate Lab, and the business school there. We have dug in really deep on the risks. The risks of climate, primarily the physical risk, looking at transition risk, and really understanding what the cost is if we do not move. And I don't mean if we don't move at all, because we're all already moving, right? We feel like we're doing a lot. But the short answer is I think we all know we're not doing enough. And so the latest research, when we actually modeled a little bit below a 2-degree scenario versus a 3-degree scenario, is by 2100 about a third of our cumulative global GDP, right? I don't know about you, but for me, that is a staggering number, right? About 34% of our GDP is at risk if we don't move much, much more substantially to keep ourselves closer to 2 degrees instead of at the 3 degrees, which is frankly where, our policies that we're actually really implementing right now would probably put us.
And I'm guessing that's not evenly spread like jam, that there are distributional effects that affect perhaps the poorest and least able to adapt much more powerfully.
Absolutely. And, there's lots of reasons why it's actually hard to act on all of that, right? But the incentives for all of us to act is there because even though the costs and benefits aren't evenly distributed, right, the magnitude of the impact on all of us when you actually think about those kinds of numbers is substantial. And let me be clear, we are not trying to be alarmist in this. We are actually trying to be incredibly rigorous and thoughtful about this. This does not include the impact of tipping points and all these things that could actually make things exacerbate much beyond that, right? The more important piece of the research that's coming out is the vast majority of that hit to our global GDP can be mitigated by our actions, right? If we do the right things on both mitigation and adaptation, right, there's probably only about 4% of that GDP loss that's unavoidable. Right? We can protect darn close to 30% of our GDP, 27, 28% of our GDP, if we start moving more aggressively now.
So I guess you're bringing with the bad news some good news, right?
Absolutely.
You're ringing the alarm bells, but also saying that almost all of this can be avoided.
Yeah.
But presumably there's a but here. That is, we need to act. We need to act in a more timely manner. And so I assume that's where you're going with this. Is that right?
That's exactly where we're going with this, right? We need to act on the mitigation front. We need to act on the adaptation front. We need to be pulling all of those levers at the same time. But it is within our grasp, right? The changing economics that support it, right? I think some of the struggle that we have is not sure that we're always facing up to the honest evaluation of the risks. If you actually parse all the CDP data that, most of us have disclosed, right? And you look at what people are articulating as climate risks, a lot of the articulation, a lot of industries, even the, high infrastructure ones that are very exposed to the dramatically increasing, extreme events that we're seeing that are climate fueled, right? About 2% impact, right? When you actually do the outside-in analysis and you say, well, where are those supply chains and what's the exposure and what's the risk to the natural assets you need? What's your risk to your capital stocks? What's your risk to your supply chains?
Yeah.
What's the productivity loss types of impacts? A lot of this, it's more like 15%. And so I think the first thing that we all need to do is take a really honest assessment of what our risks are, because unless we can do those trade-offs based on that honest assessment of risks, anytime we're pegging the risk too low, right, we've got more incentive not to act.
So we did hear yesterday from the French central banker. Many of you will remember she talked about their own assessments, that and of other European central banks that have looked at this carefully, in line with your arguments. They do see systemic risks and large risks over time. But we've also heard at the Energy Transition Summit the day before that there also can be ultimately gains to be had in that focus, it was on the energy sector, a very big part of the question here, that switching from, and we heard from Andrew Forrest, of course, of Fortescue, switching off of, in his case, fossil fuels towards a clean energy and electrified paradigm for his company. He anticipates reduced volatility in fuel expense, for example, as we shift from a model that we're based on today. So there can be advantages over time as well. After some switching cost, we can imagine a new system for, in that example, energy, where we can see benefits as well accruing.
Absolutely. I think the reduced cost from the decarbonization side of things for the business, right? When you take a focus on value, it's the cost savings from decarbonization. It's also the opportunities for growth in the green sector, right? I mean, the world is transitioning to a green economy. The destination is not uncertain. It's a question of how soon we will get there and how much damage we will prevent along the way. So the green growth acceleration opportunities that businesses have are incredibly substantial. And so I think the combination of decarbonizing and saving costs, going after the green growth opportunities, and doing everything you can to minimize the risks are where the value creation equation comes in.
Let's get the house lights up. I want to get a question or two for you, Wendy, but I have a question myself, and this is the
you have lots of questions.
Well, I always have lots of questions. This is the central one, and that is, if this is so blindingly obvious, why aren't companies doing this? And I have my own answer, and that is, companies are free riders, that they see the costs, but the costs are socialized, and at least from a short-term perspective of a CEO or a board or a quarterly investor, why not take advantage of things are going to hell in a handbasket, but in the meanwhile, we can make a tidy fortune for ourselves. That is, how do you deal with this problem of socialized costs but privatized returns?
Yeah.
Isn't that the central problem?
That is a central problem. I can articulate some nuances around that, in that more of the costs are up front, more of the benefits come a little later. Yes, there creates some winners and losers, and there's some installed base that would like to see things move slowly. There's lots of different dimensions of the nuance of that problem, but that exists. But let me also go to your fundamental premise, which, when I talk to most of the organizations here, companies are moving.
Yeah.
And many countries are moving. And so it's not a question of moving or not. It's a question of, can we move faster when we align incentives, when we work together to actually make the economics even more feasible for more of the issues that need to be addressed?
And the aligning of incentives would happen through policy, presumably.
Policy can be a big help, but also when private sector organizations work together, either across their value chain or in collaboration within a sector.
I see.
That can actually move the economics too.
So the collective action can remove any first mover disadvantage problems.
Can go a long way towards.
We have a question here. Let's make it a good one. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Dr. Stanislav Edward-Shmelev, the founder and CEO of Environment Europe Foundation. I would like to ask a question about myopic markets. This screen shows the name of a brilliant company, which I think, achieved tremendous results in decarbonization. It's the Danish company called Ørsted, right? They used to be the oil and gas producer, but they have completely changed their portfolio, and they now are one of the largest supplier of wind and so on. But if you look at their share price, it seems that the markets have not acknowledged all the progress that they have made. And my biggest question is why?
Okay. Are short-sighted markets the problem?
So I think there's a lot of things that are actually going to drive it for each individual company. So let me just start there. So I don't think there is one answer for any individual situation, right? I think there's a lot that has been rebalanced recently, given some of the geopolitics in the world right now, in terms of the energy security, the energy affordability, and the greenness of the energy that are being balanced. And that plays out differently in Europe versus the US versus parts of Asia right now, right? But you're asking a question about markets and capital. So the one thing I will say that I will find it very encouraging is more and more of the capital is actually focusing long-term. And we do need capital to take a slightly longer time horizon, and that is a big unlock on a lot of this. And when you think about the insurance dollars that are at stake right now that are actually being invested for longer term horizons, we've got asset managers and asset owners in the US right now where Apollo. More of their capital is from insurance right now that they're investing on a longer term horizon. So yes, when markets get short term, we absolutely have more challenges in doing this. I think taking hope in that more and more capital is actually beginning to focus over slightly longer time horizons and frankly more of the costs, especially when you look at insurance markets that are actually consumers and businesses are starting to bear now because of the events that we're seeing, I think actually is starting to play in on markets.
Another quick question before in the front row, if you can get a microphone here, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christina. I'm from the Centre for Synchronous Leadership. How do you propose that companies move faster?
Yeah. So I think the key is, and companies always have to start from a position of value, right? What actually makes economic sense for us to do, right? I think depending on the industry, there's an awful lot of the decarbonization that can be done that is actually cost savings. And I think especially in today's world, given all of the uncertainty, all of the volatility, anything we can do on that front makes sense. And so the question is looking very, very clearly at those opportunities, I think is the first thing. And then the second thing, it was a piece that I started to talk about, but it's what are the collaborations that you can do that unlock the economics that may not be obvious when you move alone. And so some of the partnerships like the First Mover Coalition, where companies are banding together to actually make sure that they can work together to drive down the costs, partnerships within a sector to drive innovations on development of new fuels and the things like that, that say a shipping industry needs. There's a lot of the collaboration that actually make the acceleration of the pace that no company could afford to do alone, that when you work together, the economics work. And that's what I think enables organizations to move faster than they are now.
Great. Those are words of inspiration. I hope you'll all take back to your companies. Let's give Wendy a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again.